Hi everyone, welcome back to another flipped lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the language of anatomy. So how do we, when we're studying the human body, how do we discuss it so that there's no misunderstandings of what we're talking about? There's a lot of key features that we need to know, and it's important that as scientists, and if you're a medical professional studying anatomy, you use the right terms so that there's no confusion. So as we go along, there's a lot of terms and definitions. This one, make sure you get them. Make sure you pause the video so you can get them in correctly one at a time. And then at the end, go back if there's any missing, see what you missed. And let's get into it. So the language of anatomy, right? We've talked a little bit about this, and hopefully you remember from biology class that we have organ systems. In our last lesson, we talked about levels of organization. And in an entire organism, we're organized into different organ systems, right, that function to help us maintain homeostasis. So we're going to go through these 11 real quick. And just do a brief overview. What are they? What are some of the organs? And we're going to go through these as the year goes on. So the first one here, integumentary system, right? More commonly known as the skin, right, is like the big organ of that one. It forms the external body covering, and it does help produce some vitamins and keep us warm. But really the big thing is protection, right? It protects us from the cold, protects us from the outdoor environments, and probably most importantly, protects us from infection, right? It keeps those pathogens, those outside invaders, bacteria and viruses from getting in. So that's the integumentary system. Okay, the next one is the skeletal system. And coming up on Halloween, we all know this guy, Mr. Skeleton, right? It has a couple roles here. Obviously, it's made up of the bones of our body. And the job of those bones is A, to protect us, but B, it also supports us, right? If we didn't have bones, we'd just be a big pile of mush. And then that wouldn't be fun because we couldn't run around going trick-or-treating. All right. These bones also provide spots for our muscles to attach, right? Our muscles wouldn't be able to move if they didn't pull against our bones to make them move up and down. And another really important one that we don't think about often, at first at least, is that this is where our blood cells are made. So your bone marrow inside the bone actually creates blood cells. All right. So that's our skeletal system. And obviously the next one we'll talk about is our muscular system because they work so closely together for protection and movement. And our muscular system, right, it allows locomotion, which is movement, helps us maintain posture, right? If our muscles went completely dead, we would not be able to sit up or stand up or even lay down. We would go totally limp. All right. And they do produce heat, which is really important. Keeps us warm, helps us maintain homeostasis. All right, so for the nervous system, all right, this is our control center. It's a fast-acting control system. It responds to changes outside the body and inside the body, and it controls all of our muscles, our glands, everything, right? Made up of things like our brain and spinal cord and nerves, but really is the control center. All right, our endocrine system, another really important regulatory system, and this is what makes our hormones, right? And hormones, we know all about them during our teenage years because it helps us with growth and reproduction, right? As you grow in your teenage years, your body's producing tons of hormones to stimulate that growth. And you can see from all these different types of glands here would be some of the organs in that organ system. All right, our next one is our cardiovascular system. And a couple really, really key jobs of our cardiovascular system, which some of the organs you may know of: heart, our blood vessels, our arteries, veins, capillaries, really important stuff. And think about our cardiovascular system as a highway, right? It's how we transport stuff all over the body. It moves around and blood moves around our whole body really, really quickly. Things like oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, waste, other things like sugars, and those hormones we talked about on our last slide, right? All get circulated from our cardiovascular system. Okay, our next one, similar to our cardiovascular system, is a lymphatic system. And this has to do with fluid in our body. It returns fluid to the blood vessels. It helps us with our immunity. It gets rid of debris. Really helps us maintain us healthy and keeps things from getting bad in us and growing and causing sickness and illness. And really with that fluid retention. So that's your lymphatic system. All right, also really key connected to the cardiovascular system is our respiratory system, right? This is how we get air, and in the air is that gas we all love, oxygen, down into our lungs, all right? It keeps our blood supplied with oxygen, and it removes that carbon dioxide waste. So not only does it bring stuff in, it also brings out that waste. All right, our next one, our digestive system, my favorite, breaks down food, right? We take in that food, we break it down to its tiny, tiny macromolecules, the lipids, the carbohydrates, proteins, all the stuff that we need, and it gets absorbed into our gut and it gets absorbed into our cardiovascular system, which then spreads throughout our body. So you can see how we're starting to see some of these really intertwine and connect and work together, right? But our digestive system breaks down food and nutrients, things like our stomach, mouth, esophagus, intestines, lots of good stuff here. Our urinary system, right? So you got to remember there's two different, digestive and urinary do two different things. While our digestive system takes in nutrients and it does leave out solid waste, our urinary system gets rid of nitrogenous waste, right? Nasty chemicals like nitrogen and ammonia in our body, helps maintain our acid-base balance, and it regulates how much water and electrolytes we have. So it's actually a really, really key system that you don't think about a lot, but could really, really cause some trouble if it's not working for you. All right. And our urinary system basically starts at the kidneys, which filter the blood and take out that water and salts and all that yucky stuff, goes down to our bladder, comes out the urethra with urine. All right. Our reproductive system, okay, our most important one if we want to continue and pass on our genes, right? It's how we reproduce offspring. And this is really one of the ones that is quite different in males versus females, okay? Obviously for different reproductive reasons, right? Males have testes and a penis. Females have a uterus, ovaries, vagina, all that stuff where they complement each other to reproduce and create new offspring. All right, so those are our organ systems. So if you missed, I know we went quick through that, head on back there, make sure you get them. But what are they? A couple basic organs and their basic function. All right, so moving on here. Okay, so we know the systems, but how do we talk about the human body? And like we said, we use this terminology to prevent understanding, okay? If we are talking to each other and say, oh, I'm looking at that thing below this, but to the left of that one, that's not really specific, okay? We need to use specific anatomical language to describe what we're looking at, and even more so if you're in the medical field, right? Make sure you're taking out or touching or testing the right thing. And we use these terms for position, direction, regions, and structures. So we're going to go through these, and again, make sure you get them, but we'll start from the top and just work our way through. So these are going to be orientations and directions, okay? So how we look at something. And I'll give you an example on the first one, but our first word here is superior, right? Also maybe you hear cranial or cephalad, right? Which means towards the head or the upper part of the body. So superior, think about your superior, you're above, right? So our forehead is superior to our nose. It's higher up, okay? Inferior means away from the head or to the lower part, also known as caudal, which is stands for tail, right? So our nose is inferior to our forehead. Anterior or ventral, which means towards the front of the body. So the breastbone is anterior to the spine, right in front. Posterior means towards the back of the body, as we can see right here. The heart is posterior to the breastbone or the sternum. Oops. Medial we need to gotta get medial, right? Which is towards the midline of the body. So medial, think about middle, right? And you can see here, towards the middle of the body. So the heart is medial to the arm, right? My heart is to the middle from my arm. So medial, middle. Lateral means away from the midline of the body. And think about like in football, if you throw a lateral, right, it's off to the side. The arms are lateral to the chest, right? Or my wrist is lateral to my elbow. It's further away. And just the opposite would be my elbow is medial to my wrist. It's closer to the midline. All right. Intermediate, which is between a more medial and a more lateral structure. So the armpit is intermediate between the breastbone and shoulder. So my breastbone, right? My shoulder, here's my armpit. Okay, it's in the middle. My elbow is intermediate to my wrist and my humerus. Cool. Proximal means close. Think about proximity, right? Getting close to somebody. To the origin of the body or the point of attachment of a limb or the body trunk. A lot of words there. Think about closer. So the elbow is proximal to the wrist, meaning the elbow is closer to the shoulder or attachment than the wrist is. So here's my elbow, here's my wrist. My elbow is proximal. It's closer to the body, all right? The opposite would be distal, right? Think about distal distance. It is further from the origin of the body. So the knee is distal to the thigh. I'll do a different one here so you can see it, right? My wrist is distal to the elbow. It's further away from the body. Okay, superficial, towards the surface of the body. So the skin is superficial to the skeleton, means it's further up. All right, and then deep, away from the body surface. The lungs are deeper or deep to the rib cage. So my ribs are out here, right? My lungs are further in. Cool. Woo! That was a whole bunch of directions. I know we went through that fast. Look at the pictures again. Look at your words. Make sure you got them. All right, and then some just body landmarks. I'm not going to go through all these, but hopefully you know the word anterior, right? Anterior means forward or on the front. So these are all different landmarks, right? Carpal, wrist, digital, fingers, umbilical, belly button, thoracic, chest. All right, so these are all landmarks that we'll talk about. You don't have to know all these right away. We will go over them. And then some posterior landmarks, right? Gluteal in the glutes, popliteal behind the knee, sacral by the sacrum spine, okay? Posterior on the back, facing the back. All right. Something here just, and this is just really important to know, right? We actually have a standard anatomical position, okay? And that's because if I were to say, hey, my arm's broken, you say, which one? And you go, oh, left. And you go, wait a minute, my left or your left, right? It's hard to know if you don't know. So whenever we talk about the anatomical position, it would be your body standing erect, so straight up, not bent, not slouched, not laying down, not crunched over. So standing straight up, your feet slightly apart, your palms facing forward, and your thumbs pointing out. All right. And whenever we refer to left or right, it's always the patient or the person we're studying. So on this gentleman here, his left arm would actually be this one, right? It's his left, and he's facing forward in the anatomical position. Okay. And again, the whole point of the anatomical position is to make sure we don't confuse body parts. All right. So body planes, right? Not how do we get on an airplane, but how do we chop things up and look at things at different levels? So we'll have three major ones that we'll talk about. The first is the mid-sagittal or median or midline plane, right? I like mid-sagittal. And that would be, imagine cutting somebody straight down the middle here with a big knife, right? Straight down the middle, and we peel it open and we can look in both sides, would be a mid-sagittal plane. A frontal plane or coronal would be we cut somebody straight down the side and straight down the arms too, right? Front and back. So if you took my side and went straight down here, my arms, right? That would be a frontal, because think about it, you could see the whole front of the body. And then finally, a transverse, also known as like a cross section, maybe you've heard, where you chop something in half right across the middle, would be a transverse plane, so like right across the abdomen here. And interesting fact, right? Median and frontal planes, we actually would see the same thing on both sides, pretty much, with some exceptions on some organs, right? But the left side would be, oh God, Sadie's here. Sadie, say hello, everyone. She is not for dissection, okay? So the median plane would be left and right. They'd be the same. And frontal, front and back, would pretty much be the same. Transverse is the only plane where you're not going to have what's called that bilateral symmetry, right? Which means the same on both sides. Cool. All right, another good one here. Some body cavities. So inside your body, right? And you'll see here once we dissect the cats. Again, not Sadie, she's mine, Mrs. Tota's, right? But we have some different cavities where our organs reside. So everything's not just loosey-goosey in there floating around and blood everywhere, right? Everything's actually really nice and neat and contained, right? Your blood's in your blood vessels and your organs are stacked nice and neat. They're actually in place with connective tissue. And we actually find your organs in certain cavities, all right? So these are the cavities we need to know. And we'll start from the top down. First off, your cranial cavity, right? Oops, excuse me. Come on. Your cranial cavity, right? And obviously, I think you would know up here is your brain. Okay, your cranial cavity. Your next one further down is your thoracic cavity, also known as the chest, right? But the thoracic cavity. It's in your chest. The bottom part is the diaphragm, which is a muscle, okay? And the top part comes all the way up here where your trachea and esophagus come out. So some of the things that are in here would be your heart, your lungs, your big, great blood vessels are all in the thoracic cavity. The next one down would be your abdominal cavity, right? A lot of digestive and excretory organs here. Your small intestine, your stomach, your large intestine, your anus, your rectum, your kidneys, right? Lots of stuff down here in the abdominal cavity. We have the spinal cavity, right? So it's actually along inside your vertebrae here. This is considered a space, a cavity, where your spinal cord is. Your cerebrospinal fluid is in there. Lots of good stuff. And then last but not least, your pelvic cavity, a big spot down here where resides in your pelvis, which are your bones, your hip bones, and lots of stuff in there. You could actually bleed a lot in there. It's a big space. Okay, so these are your body cavities where those organs reside. And then finally, when we look at the abdomen, and we'll get more, there's actually more areas than this, but I didn't want to cover it on this flip lesson. But think about your abdomen as quadrants, right? Quad means 4. So we have 4 quadrants, and they're based on location. Upper left, upper right. And again, you notice that's the patient's left and the patient's right. Right lower and lower left quadrant. Okay, and you can see there's different organs within these 4 quadrants. Okay, so those are the 4 abdominopelvic quadrants. Cool, that's the end. Holy cow, that was a lot of words. So make sure you go back and you know them. Make sure you got them all written down for your flipped notes, and go over those. If you have any questions, go back and watch them, and we'll talk about them in school. So hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.